So I think we can start. Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar. My name is Arturo Patiño from the Young Americas Business Trust. Today I'm glad to introduce the speaker of this presentation. His name is Mr. Maximiliano Campos, Senior Chief for the Integrated Water Resources Management Division at the Organization of American States. During his presentation, Mr. Campos will go over current critical points regarding the water as a non-renewable resource, addressing access to clean and drinking water and its efficient usage. Before getting started, I would like to tell the audience that your questions are welcome. At the end of this presentation, there will be a section of questions and answers in which you will be able to share your comments and doubts. Without nothing left to say, I give the floor to Maximiliano Campos. Hello, sir. Welcome to the webinar, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Arturo, and I really appreciate the invitation on my behalf and also on my team working on water resources here at OAS. Today's presentation is going to be addressing important things regarding water, the access of clean water for secure consumption and the efficient use for a sector like agriculture, which is the highest demander of water in the world. So we are going to try to reach a point in which we could have some conclusions on those two topics. And of course, that the idea is to have a great knowledge around the water management, integrated water resources management, water governance, and several other concepts that would lead us to these specifics that we are trying to address in particular here. I don't know if we could have, at least for me to have an idea, we have some people online, and if Arturo, you could give me an idea of some of the background of the people who are we speaking to, just to me to see how deeply or less deeply we should go into the conference. Any ideas?
Yes, we have some participants who wants to participate in the Eco Challenge category in the TIC Americas competition.
Mm-hmm. And they are from basically United States, Caribbean?
Yeah, from different part of the Americas.
Okay, all right. Okay, so anyhow, let's start. And as Arturo said, we are going to have a space for for trying to take some questions, some comments from your sides, some specifics that I will try to help you a little bit. If not, at least I will take notes, so I will come back to you by email or by any other means, so we could try to address the specifics of that. So let's start just with this picture, which is a little bit of the experiences that we have on water resources for the Americas. This is going to be a kind of a Spanglish type of session, but I know that we, in the universal language of science, we could go through very easily. There are some slides in English, there are some other in Spanish, but this is like a 96 slides. So I'm not going to go through all of them, because the idea is for you to have the full presentation. And in case that you have a specific question, some other topics that probably we are not going to address here, but at least for you to have the notes, so you could approach me in some other time if you wish. So the first thing is that we are going to build this conference based on the experiences that we have here at the organization from American States, which is a 50 years, 5 decades of working on water resources management in the Americas. Okay, so let's see, we could jump to the next one. Okay, so we are going to talk about 3, 4, 5 things, more or less. Okay, we are going to talk about the challenges that we face in our area of water resources, which are global and which are local challenges. So let's talk. We are going to talk about the water resources from the point of view of supply and demand of water. We're going to put some examples of Central America, which are the ones that I have more elaborated over here, but could be, we could build examples for South America, for Caribbean, for United States, or Mexico, or Canada, because more or less they follow the same methodology. One important thing that we are going to talk about in order to understand what is the agriculture and the water consumption standing for in this issue of water resources in the Americas is what is called the governance of water, which is nowadays the more important issue regarding water in the Americas, and of course integrated water resources management, which probably many of you know that this is one of the main tools for promoting development using water resources as an element. We could share some of the experiences that also we have at the OES. We could talk about the experience at the Bermejo between Argentina and Bolivia. We talk about the experience at the Trifini region, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. We could talk at the experience at the Bravo River, which is between the U.S. and Mexico. We could talk about Cuenca del Plata, Acuífero Guaraní, some of these experiences that we have been putting together along these 50 years of working with the member states. Then also we could talk about some new issues regarding water, which are also very important and in which I think that the participation of young entrepreneurships would be great. For example, all these issues related with the extracting sector regarding mining, pollution, mercury pollution in water, the problem with sanitation and potable water in many of the of the regions or countries which has strong extractive industries, the competing of use, water and commerce, all these issues are very important and require a lot of new ideas, especially from young people, to try to face the challenges. So these are going to be some of the elements that we are going to discuss. And at the end, I hope that we could conclude something for the specifics of the access to water and the efficient use, especially for agriculture. Okay, so the next slide is related to the challenges themselves. Let me close. Let's see if I close this. Arturo, just one question. In my screen, are you seeing the
No, Max, you're the only one who can see it.
Yes, no, what I mean is that you see the GoToMeeting piece?
No.
No, oh, right. Okay, so let me just try to close it over here so we could just, it don't get into my way. So now, back to the point. So can you hear me well, everything? Yes?
Yes, okay.
Okay. So the first thing that we are going to address here are, what are the challenges? Where water stands in this planet, and specifically in this hemisphere, okay? And the first thing that we have to say is that in this new century, we face in the first 10, 15 years, several simultaneous challenges that we, in some way, framework them in the concept of global changes. Why? Because we have the effects of, for example, the crisis in energy that it was all around the news, the financial crisis that affect many countries, especially developed countries like the United States and so on, the human crisis, not only in the Americas, but also in Africa and many other regions. And a lot of this is associated to water. The climate crisis, well, we are a couple of weeks or 1 week close to the COP in Paris, in which we are going to take important decisions related to climate. And in this particular, I want you to put a lot of attention, because water is so climate dependent that everything that happened at the COP is going to have an effect on water. And also the issue of food. And this is where we start touching base with the specifics of the efficient use of water for the agriculture. There was a crisis on food security in the world and in the Americas and so on. So, and also the crisis on water that is in some way associated to water governance for the Americas. So that's some of the things that we call the global challenges. Okay. So let's see if we could jump to the next one. Okay, so one important thing is that we have to understand what is the scenario that we are facing in this planet, in which water is cross-cut all this that we are going to say. The first thing that we have to imagine is that how are we going to be in the next 15 years? The first thing that determines the use and manage of water is the economy, the global economy in some way. And this global economy is projected to grow almost at 50% in the next 15 years, in which more than 1,000 millions of persons are going to move toward the cities, especially in Latin America, which is becoming a more urbanized region for the world. In that cities is where we produce more or less 80% of all productivity is taking place at the cities. And so they are very intense and consuming a lot of the energy from the planet. 70% of the energy of the planet takes place in the cities. So this is a huge amount of greenhouse gases. 70% of the gases, the greenhouse gases that are being thrown to the planet has its origin at the cities. So it is important that in a planet in which is becoming more and more people are moving toward the cities and associated to this productivity, to the energy sector, to the transportation, we are going to have more greenhouse gases. And you will see how this is related to water and what you could plan for agriculture and access to water, to potable water too. 2,500 millions of persons are going to reach the middle class. And so what it means? It means that we are going to increase our patterns of unsustainability. We are going to increase the pressure on national resources. We are going to increase the potential of conflictivity associated with those resources, especially water, that happens to be on the borders. Not only the superficial water that normally divide one country from the other, but also the aquifers that exist below this border. So that's important thing to know and understand. So we could summarize this. The excessive consumption of natural resources that affect the ecosystems. There are millions who live without access of water and electricity. There are a lot of pressure on human beings and the ecosystem is increasing very rapidly. The governments and society cannot catch up with the damages that are already caused by natural disasters, 80% of them associated to water. And then the increase on the pressure on the government system, because everybody is asking the governments to react to something that, as a matter of fact, is society as a whole that has to respond. So then, in order to try to face all these challenges and try to go to the specifics of water and agriculture and potable consumption, we have to understand that these global challenges has a piece of local challenges too. And the best example of this is global warming, which is a clear example of local and global interaction. And you'd see what global warming, climate change has to do with water? Well, it has to do with everything, and with water especially. When you talk about mitigation of greenhouse gases, you are talking about energy. And a lot of these sources of energy are associated to water. When you talk adaptation to climate change, you are definitely talking about water. So it is important through this example to understand the teleconnection that exists between global and local challenges with the specifics. Through this example of global warming, it could be one. And we are going to go in more detail around this. One of the main factors that affect the possibility for have more better uses of water is this factor, is the population of the planet. The population is what I call a fundamental determinant. And this is something that not too many people want to talk about, but it is right there. The more people we have, the more demand for water we are going to have. This is straightforward. So there is no big deal on that. And the population is increasing. It's increasing at a level such that could create some or more competing uses for water. But for the case of the Americas, what is important here is to see this. The Americas in some way, as a whole, not only North America and South America, I hope that you can see the arrow, we have a positive balance regarding the amount of people that we have and the water resources that we have. The America as a continent has almost half of the water of the world. So it is a rich region. So this is why many important things on water happen in the Americas. Not all, for example, you can compare this with Europe, in which they have more population than water, in other areas like Asia or Africa, in which they have more population than water. So their demand is huge based on the resources, the water resources that they do have. Our extraction is large, but not enough for overcome what the availability of water that we have. But this is a plus, but you will see later that sometimes it is a minus. This is an interesting example because when you consider what are the possibilities for being efficient regarding water for agriculture and food productivity, or for accessing clean water for human consumption, you have to understand what are you competing with regarding the uses of water. And this is a new, the last 3-4 years, this new concept has been on the spot internationally, what is called the nexus between water and energy. And it is based on the hypothesis that the increasing population, for example, in the 2035, we are going to be 8 millions, not 7, 8 millions. For 2050, we could be close to 9 millions. So it means that if the consumption patterns associated to population growth and consumption itself are maintained like the ones that we have right now, what is called the business as usual scenario, for the year 2035, the energy consumption would increase in 35%, which translated into water, it means that we need to increase water consumptions by 85% for responding to this energy sector. So increases in pressure on finite water resources. That's the conclusion. And that's very important because if you are having more people in this Americas continent, that you have to produce more food, so you are going to compete with a sector which is very strong and very powerful and is producing goods, and with other sectors too, but that's a statistics is it puts you in the real context. If you go for the specifics for Latin America, if you take the electricity generation for 2050, it's going to grow very fast. From 2012 to 2015, it may grow in 550%. In order to catch up with the demands. Especially we are talking about hydropower, which means that for the water sector, we need to increase the 360%, more or less, the water used by the power sector. Okay, so you see here there is a strong determinant for what we wanted to do and why innovation is so important for other sectors others than energy in that case. So that's an important factor. No, let's take some facts into account. One thing is that, as I just mentioned to you, the Americas is, and when we talk America, we're not talking about the United States. That's a very important clarification that I have to make. America is the continent. So we are talking about North America, Central America, Caribbean, and South America. So when we talk the Americas, is at the end, is this whole hemisphere. So America is one of the regions with more water in the planet, with more than 25 cubic kilometers per year, and extraction of only 3%, more or less, associated to domestic use, industrial, and agriculture sector mainly. Only the Caribbean account for 1/3 of the renewable resources of the world associated to water. Even though it is a small territory with only 15% of land and 8.4% of the population of the world, receive almost 1/3 of the precipitations of the world. And this is an important factor that, the second time that I'm going to make this statement, water and climate go hand by hand. So the amount of precipitation that is received depends a lot on the water. This is a pie chart that shows you a little bit how water is distributed in the rest of the world. So this is just to take a look at on how countries like Japan with 1% of the water, Central Africa, Southeast Africa, North Africa, South Asia, etc. These are very regions with a lot of limitation regarding water. South America and North America, and when we add them together, it's almost 45%. Almost half of the water of the world happens to be in this region of the Americas. Okay. But there are some things that needs to be taken into consideration when we talk about this great water capital that we have. One of the things is that the water distribution in the American continent is not homogeneous. It's very heterogeneous in some way. And it is subject to a lot of pressures, as I mentioned before, when we talk about the challenges associated with extractions from agriculture, mining, also associated to the great deal of deforestation that is taking place in the Americas, in many of our basins, which has an important impact on the possibility for the basins to capture all this moisture and water and to recharge our aquifers. And this is an important factor to take into account at the time of planning. Another important thing that we have in the America, and we are very well advanced in that regard, is that we have been studied a lot of the transboundary resources that we have, especially the aquifers. We happen to have 74 aquifers in the continent, in our borders, which is very important from the point of view of our reserve for the future. But now that the pollution is so exponentially growing in the Americas, a lot of this water from the transboundary basins are in use. Some countries, like the Plata Basin countries, have been working in some kind of international agreements in order to protect and make sustainable use of this water. And this is also an important factor to take into account. The water from the aquifers is fundamental for the future. Okay, let's see, we pass to the next one. One of the big issues that are being discussed for the last years, but especially this week, is the issue of climate change. And I will show you some of the fundamentals of the IPCC report from climate change from the UN that was released last year in the specifics on water in America. But now let's just take into account that a lot of the problems on climate change are going to be associated to water availability and the effects that they could have for potable water consumption, for hydroelectricity generation, in general, for the water, for irrigation, for producing food. And finally, one thing that needs to be taken into account and in which we require a lot of innovation, technology use, communications, and from where some entrepreneurship could be ideal to have, is that a lot of the disasters are associated with climate. In the case of Central America, which is one example that we're going to use a lot here for the figures that we have, is that around 80% of the disasters that happens in Central America are associated to water. So you see, there is a strong correlation between one and the other one. Okay, let's now see water management from the point of view of integrated water resources management. And this is nothing else that, let's see the supply and let's see the demand of water, okay? So this is what we can imagine. Every time that we talk about the supply of water, we can imagine all these beautiful landscapes, lakes, rivers, waterfalls, all this type of beautiful things. And when we imagine the demand, the irrigation channels for producing food, the water supply, the water rafting, the moving the ships along canals, all these are the beautiful things, generation of electricity, all these are associated to the water demand. But let's see some figures. Let's see some numbers over here. What it means for our countries, how much water we have, and we express how much water we have in what we call water capital, which is the amount of water that you could have, say, on your territory, without taking into account what crossed the borders. It's just the water that falls along the year and your basins are able to catch. So, for example, let's take a look at one country like the United States. The United States has around close to 9,000 cubic meters per capita, which is the amount of water that you have in cubic meters divided by your population. So, based on the population that you have in the United States, you can see, well, we could have we have a lot of water, yes, but you have a lot of people too. Say the case of Brazil. Brazil has a huge amount of water resources, has a strong capital regarding cubic meters, but also has a long population that has to be served by this water. Case of countries like Panama, for example, with the canal and all this type of thing that they have 52,000 around 52,000 cubic meters per capita. So what it means that there are many countries, like Belize, for example, that are real, which has great potential for promoting the use of water for attending a demand, for a growing demand also, but also for reaching productivity in many levels. There are other countries like, for example, El Salvador, which has a huge population, but also is limited by the amount of water resources that they have. Why? Because, well, the main water supply in Central America happens along the Caribbean region, and El Salvador is only a Pacific region. Or Pacific watershed country. So in that regard, that's very important. When you compare, for example, the average of water, the water capital that you have in Central America with other countries, for example, Central America as an average, they have the same amount of water like Brazil. United States has only 30% of the water that Central America has. Mexico has 18% of what Central America has. Excuse me, 15%. Holland is only 18% and things like this. So it means that for many countries, especially developed countries, United States, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and so on, water and its limitation it's very important to be used very efficiently. That's the reason why dynamics like the Ecoreto has a lot of fundamental, how to bring these to the new agenda of our countries that having too much water and being so creative, they could be transformed into development potential, and that's what they numbers on this table say. Now let's jump into something which is very important to understand, because if we want to plan for opportunities for clean water for consumption and water efficiency for producing food, we have to understand from where the water is coming from in our hemisphere. And we have several things. The first thing, and this is the third time that I'm going to tell it, because this is very important to remember, the water supply is climate dependent. There is no other way to see it. The climate determines the amount of water that you have in your territory for whatever use that you want. And the climate and the water depends on several things. There are some pieces of the climate that we call the climate variability that normally has the potential to produce droughts and floods. So climate variability is the main factor for what we call the climate extremes that could be affected by this climate change that we have been talking about, and you will hear a lot next week, that change the patterns of rainfall and increase these climate extremes. And beside that, if we add to this problem the water quality and the strong pollution that we are in big trouble. So anyhow, let's try to jump a little bit more on the details of this. When we talk about climate variability, and this picture is, I'm going to show you this picture later, but what we are talking about is something that you see in the news that is called a phenomenon of El Nino, okay? And that's very important to understand, because during the last 18 months, and from now to the next 6 months, we are under the spell of El Nino Oscillation. El Nino, Enos, is called the El Nino Oscilación del Sur. And it's called El Nino because it was discovered many, many, many years ago by some fishermen in the South American coast from Ecuador and Peru. And normally it started during the time of December 25th, around this month. So it's in Latin America, we say that El Nino is coming in December, which is Santa Claus and all this type of say Christmas, you know. And so this El Nino received this name. And basically what is an oscillation that makes an interaction between the ocean with the atmosphere in contact with this ocean, and produce a lot of anomalies regarding the temperature of the ocean that changes the climate a lot. We have two different phenomena, one called El Nino and one called La Niña, and both produce different effects. In the case of El Nino, and this is one example, what you have, and this is a satellite picture that shows you quite well how the temperature of the ocean increases. And during La Nina, you don't have this pattern. So El Nino has no exact frequency, but could happen every 5-6 years. And that is something that has some kind of complicated explanation, but it's part of what is called the natural variability of the planet. This is something that we cannot do more than adapt, because this is something that the planet has as a response to certain internal changes between interaction between the atmosphere and the ocean. Okay, so there is not too much that we could do. But beside El Nino and the anomalies that they produce, we have other systems that produce water. For example, the cold fronts, especially you are here in the United States, you have the interaction between warm fronts, warm air and cold air is what we call the fronts. And these fronts are regions of strong precipitation that leaves a lot of water in our basins in order to be used for several other purposes. Of course, that they can produce tornadoes and a lot of disasters, as well as hurricanes. There are systems that produce a lot of water in our tropical region, especially in the southern part of the United States. But of course, they are disasters by themselves. But they also bring a lot of water that once the hurricane passes, you have the reservoirs full of water ready to use for agriculture, ready to use for producing energy, or for human potable consumption or industry, whatever it is. So you see, these are examples of how dependent is your resources on land based on the water. El Nino produces a lot of climatic problems. And something that is interesting to take into account is that the hurricane season in the Caribbean has less hurricanes when you have El Nino. You could question, this year we had only the effect of one hurricane approaching some of the islands of the Caribbean, 1 or 2 the most, when we normally have 8 or 10. So it is important that when we have El Nino, we have less hurricanes than on the Caribbean basin. Also, we have an increase in the number of electric storms in the southern part of the United States, which is 50% more during the time of El Nino. And then the distribution of precipitation changes. And this is the main factor that people see on the news every day. What happens is that in places like it never rains or rains very little, like in Lima or some other countries, it rains. Or in cities or places in which it rains a lot, rains almost nothing, say in the Pacific side of Central America, southern part of Mexico. Okay, that's important. And the main manifestation of these circumstances is, and this is an example of Central America that I put over here, is that there is what is called the drought corridor along Central America that goes from the Arco Seco of Panama, passing by the northwestern part of Costa Rica, connecting with the Pacific of Nicaragua, central and Pacific of Honduras and Salvador, and southern part of Guatemala, and southern part of Mexico too. So the effects of the drought in Central America, when you have the climate variability called El Nino, is very important. So when you are trying to innovate for accessing clean water for human consumption, or try to increase the efficiency for agriculture, you have to understand what kind of climate associated with the amount of water that you're going to have. Because you could deal with the more efficient system for agriculture, but if you have no rain, you have no water. So your innovation is going to be in big trouble. Okay, so that's why it is important to understand all the dynamics of the association between water resources and the atmosphere. And this is a real pictures of these days, in which what we are having here is the main factors that are affecting Central America, Colombia, Peru, and so on, regarding the phenomenon of El Nino and the drought that these people is having. Okay, these are some just illustration, but this is a good example on. This is an example on how the people is affected, but this is an example on how the business, and this is interesting because if you want to be good business people, you have to see how the big business adapt to this type of things. And this is the case that I like to present to you about the Canal of Panama, which is a great example of using water for moving ships on transportation through the canal, with a cost per ship that sometimes could reach $250,000 to move one ship from one size to the other one. So you can imagine what happened when you don't have enough water to move these ships. The business collapses. So it doesn't mean that a small business is the only one that are affected. No, large business can also be affected. But they have, by nature, they have their own ways of adapting. And one way is that they could transform their business in some way. Let me show you this example to be more precise on this. Between 97 and 98, there was another phenomenon of El Nino. There was a strong drought that affected the Canal of Panama. The amount of water that they need to have in order to move ships from the Caribbean to the Pacific, or from the Pacific to the Caribbean, remember, with a cost of up to $250,000 per ship, is this one. This is the green line that you can see over here. This is the more critical level of water that you could have. But you see that during this period, they have 1, 2, 3, almost 4 months in which the water was below the critical level. So you cannot move the ships from one side to the other one. So you are losing millions of dollars during 3 months of not moving ships. That's very important. So how you adapt your business? What kind of idea can you bring to the table of the board, of the CEOs, and all these people to adjust? First, you have to understand the phenomenon. You have to understand what is the forecast. You have to understand that water is climate dependent here, and climate variability is going to affect it. So what they did, adapting to this condition, is that they changed the size of the chips, and they keep on charging per chip and not for the load that they could carry. Okay, so in some way the business was adapted, but now they're facing another challenge. Let me just show you this. And as you know, there is a new engineering part of this being worked out. They have a wider type of it's called esclusas in Espanol. I don't know how it's called in English, but anyhow, this is how the chips are moved, and this is the actual size, and this is the new largest size. They say that they use 7% more less water than the ones from before. So they have been trying to innovate from the hydraulic point of view in order to recycle the same water that they use, so they don't have to depend on climate as they did it before. So these are kind of innovations. There is this kind of ideas of people that are being transforming. Let me just very briefly, because I want to have more interactions with you that me talking about. There are some other things that affect also the climate. The climate change is one of them. You could have you could take a look of how the climate is changing. This is data. This is not something that is model. This is just a data that from between 1901 and 2012 that shows that the Americas is a region really that is warming up from 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, and this is very important. And when you model this under a scenario more conservative like this, or more severe like this other, really we are in trouble, because we are under the spell of climate change regarding temperature. You can study climate change using all this type of approaches. I'm not going to go into many details of this part, because it is time consuming, and probably it might not be that important for you, but for those of you who would like to be interested in that, we have some specialists working on this modeling and downscaling techniques for climate change and so on, and also how to monitor and how to work on climate variability studies in order to associate to water. So the important thing is that the impacts of climate change in the Americas are associated to extreme climates, impacts on agriculture, impacts on biodiversity, impacts on human health, on water resources, and marine and coastal resources too. because of sea level rise, water intrusion, and so on. So these are some of the things. Let me just remind you some important outcome of last year. The fifth assessment report from IPCC concluded, and these are determinant in some way, that there are some things that are attributed to climate change. And these are solid and, well, contundentes, which means very strong in some way for the hemisphere. Okay, there are some pictures and examples from the report, and I invite you to take a look. But these are the ones associated to water in the Americas, for North America, for Central and South America, and for island states like the ones in the Caribbean. So one of the more important things, and I'm going to talk just about two of them. One is the one associated with the melting of the glaciers in the Andean countries. We're talking about Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, some parts of Colombia too. So there is a fact. The level of confidence is very high, and the contribution to climate change is huge. So there is not going to be any other study from science that replaces this. The melting of the glacier is a fact. In South America, in North America. So the water that depends for agriculture or for human consumption based on these resources is going to be affected. So we need a lot of thoughts about how to adapt to new condition of water, trying to be more efficient in its use. We could talk about several other things, about the changes in the runoff or the amount of water that we have from the Amazonas. We could talk about in some of the subbasins of the Rio de la Plata, how it is going to change and so on. And also we could talk about some of the major facts in the United States too. But I just want to stress the point that climate change is going to bring several effects on what we have as normal so far. Okay. I wanted to put this chart over here because this is something that I see very interested for you to think about it. Is that we need to integrate knowledge, and this is where we could put something for the specific. Well, you want to work on agriculture, or you want to work in water consumption. So we have a lot of lesson learned, experiences, and good practices in the Americas as a whole. And what we don't have is good toolkits or webs dedicated to policies formulation for these specific areas, which includes the climate change scenarios with the climate variability scenarios. I know that it may sound complicated and too specific, but if you really would like to have an incidence based from the potential business of the future for sectors like production of food or potable water for human consumption, everything goes through policies in some way, because what we want to, through our examples, to stimulate these policies at the regional, at the local level that could help us to adapt, to mitigate, or to transform. So building these systems could be an impressive contribution for communities, for states, for countries, for regions, and of course for the Americas. Okay, that's important. The other factor that is depending on water is the water demand. Water demand depends on the amount of people that we have. Water demand depends on the water that we are going to use for have more irrigated area to produce more food. Water demand depends on how we use water for hydroelectricity, and then what it means that the water demand is a big determinant for our potential uses. So let's summarize. Summarizing, we have global determinants that basically we could have good examples during these 15 years of this century. We have an exponential pollution of the bodies of water that required more investments for maintaining, for potable water, for sanitation, for hydroelectricity, for transportation, for tourism, for recreation. The supply of water has can be affected a lot by climate variability and climate change, and the demand is going to increase a lot, especially to, as I mentioned, population growth and the competing abuse. So let me just go for 1 second to one of the things that we do, especially with the youth. One of the things that we have been working with is on water harvesting as a local example of potentially use, especially for rural and remote regions. In some of we're working at the borders, especially, which are very depressed regions, and that's very interesting. And because I believe that creating some type of independence from the main suppliers of water, especially in rural communities where water cannot be reached through the pipelines because of the huge investments that are necessary, creates an opportunity to innovate in water harvesting. And this is one idea that we have been working in the region of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador in this very dry border, and also at this adjacency zone between Belize and Guatemala, in which we are building, and this is, let's say, important, we are building from all this climate data, okay? We are building all these systems. So we are building scenarios for different types of demand. We have when we have little water or when we have more water per month. We are transforming all this rain into liters of water based on the size of the roofs that we have. In these examples, we are using, for example, for a community, the roofs from a church and the roofs from schools, and we are creating this type of system for the kids at the schools to have clean and potable water. We are showing them how to make this water potable too. And also when they have plenty of water, the drainage from this water is going to be used for irrigating their crops and so on. At a small farm and levels, that could be okay. Because we are approaching the 12, I asked Arturo if he considered that we could have some interactions with you guys for the precision of that you would like to issues. But my important message here is that we have to understand the big challenges that water is facing in the planet associated with other important factors and determinant, and how these affect factors like the climate that is the mere controlling of water in order for us to be into the business of water for potable or water for agriculture. Arturo?
Thank you, Mr. Campos. Mr. Campos, for your words. It's a really interesting topic regarding the future of, as you mentioned before, the access to water in the Americas and how it will be affecting its demand through people and industrial sectors. We have now received some questions through our chat system. So I don't know if you want to answer the questions right now.
Yeah, well, if I can.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can.
Of course, yeah. Okay, so the first question will be, what are the current situations of water access in South American countries? Is it a big challenge of not as big as in some Caribbean countries?
Okay, I would say that it is an interesting question because and actually when I will for my next conference I will try to put some other examples that give you a better idea on that, and that's it. For South America, depending on where you are, of course, depending on where you are, but in general, we could say that the access of water is still more. It is less stressing as it is for some countries like the Caribbean countries. In the Caribbean, with exceptions probably of Dominica, which is an island with a lot of water, there are a lot of stress on the water use and water consumption on the Caribbean. But I would say that for South America, it's still an opportunity that good management could deal a lot with the demand that they have. What they have in South America that they need to be considered is the competing of the uses of water from so many sectors. For example, agriculture is competing with the extracting industry. a lot. And this you could see at the Andes region, you could see it in South America also, when you have a lot of crops being produced from, for example, from biofuels. And so the food productivity is competing with the potentials of water use in other areas. Okay, that's important. Another factor that needs to be into account is that Latin America as a whole is growing into more, is oriented to be more urban. So the more urban you are, the more water dependent you become in some way. So that would be a partial answer to this.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have a second question. It says how climate change in regard of rising ocean water levels will affect the access to drinking water. Are they related in any way?
Yes, they are directly. There is a direct relation between climate change, sea level rise, and access to drinking water, especially in the coastline, and those cities who are depending on the aquifers from the coast regions in order to have their supply. So what happened is that the more water you extract from the aquifers along the coastlines, the more potential of salt intrusion do you have. So there is a straight relationship into that. And if you see the news from the last 2 weeks, there is a strong warning on how the melting of the Antarctica is taking place, and the potential of having an accelerated sea level rise. And I think that this is going to be a strong argument for reaching some type of consensus in Paris next days. So that's a straightforward, especially for those populations who are along the coastlines and those countries along the Caribbean.
Okay, thank you. Jess, the third question will be how access to water is measured. Is it just for drinking water or any kind of water?
Say that again, please.
Yeah, it says how access to water is measured. Is it just for drinking water or any kind of water?
Okay, how the access to water is measured? You are hitting a super important point regarding this. There is no an exact methodology or a standard for measuring the water extraction. I have done some studies in the past for several countries, and it is very difficult because the amount of data available for water extraction is very limited. This is something that it is in some way being managed by some people who has been extracting water, especially from the aquifers, in a not very clear or legal type of way. I know that there are several countries. I'm coming from Costa Rica. I know that the Costa Rican government has done a lot of work on systematizing the permits for extracting water and paying for that water. And so they have been now a database very detailed regarding the amount of water that is being extracted. But there is no standard. If you take a look of some of the reports, for example, the World Water that is being published by the Pacific Institute or for some UN statistics, there are some estimations with a lot of notes to the margins of the publications regarding how this water is being extracted. So it is not only for accessing water for human consumption, is this access that is shared by agriculture sector, by industry sector, and some other uses. But basically, what is well understood is that almost 70% of the water access of the world is for agriculture sector.
Okay, thank you, Jess. The next one will be I would like to know more about purification of water. So the question is, how is the purifying water sector working in the Americas? Is there enough supply of this process in Americas?
Well, that's also very interesting. Very interesting. I think that now there is more opening in the sector. Why? Because what happened in the past is that most of the methods that were used were centralized by large companies that normally depends on government budget in order to do so. There are still countries, many of them, especially small countries, that still have decentralized systems, but also now they believe that the need for purification of water, especially for supply, is necessary to have it at smaller scales, especially in rural zones. So municipalities are taking more a visible job and work, and they're doing a lot of work on that regard. But still, I would say that in general in the Americas, the supply sector and associated purification and potable water consumption is pretty much still on hands of the governments and countries. And the reason why is that the investment necessary for maintaining these systems is very high. Normally, these companies work not only on the potable water consumption, but also on sanitation. And so this is an equation that sometimes works very, very difficult, but basically the governments are the one who invest the most. In cases like the United States or Canada, in which a lot of private companies do these services, they have been proven that they are work. But also, governments has a lot to facilitate as incentives in order for those companies to become profitable at some point.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can wait a few seconds more so we can receive more questions.
I would like to hear if they have some type of ideas for these innovations on agriculture. On potable water, I think that people had it more clear, especially for small communities. But for agriculture, I would like to hear more of what they have thinking that could be useful, especially now that I mentioned to you that this is strong dependence on climate, understanding the climate before jumping into this type of thing.
Okay, yes. Now we have a follow-up question of the last one. It says, how feasible is the purification of water for future demand of water?
How feasible? That's something for a business research in some way. I cannot tell you how feasible it is. But I think that for certain size of communities, this could be an interesting approach. There are different categories in which we could have this. Purification of water being harvested is one interesting thing. I know that, for example, in Mexico City, in this large city, some buildings already have a lot of water, produce a lot of water harvesting, and they use this water not purified for human consumptions, but for some of the services that they provide along the building. That's an interesting business approach and economy for the owners of the complex. So, but I think that there is, I would say there is I venture to say that there is some possibilities. There are some space, but this will depend especially on the size of the community or the target group that you would like to address.
Okay, Jess, we just received another one. It says, regarding agriculture and its access to water, is there any forecast that can tell us if agriculture is going to be affected by the access of water?
Oh yes, it is, because I just was having a Skype conference too with colleagues in Peru a couple of weeks ago, and it was very interesting because we were talking the competing uses between water for agriculture, water for energy, and water for the mining companies or the mining sector. And it is very evident that water is now the basic for everything. So there is not necessary to make a large assessment on that. Agriculture is going to be under the pressure because water for irrigation is used very inefficiently, and this is something which requires a lot of innovation. Why not to use less water like it happens in many parts of like in Israel or some other places that use certain techniques in order to be very efficient with the use of water. We are not saying that this is the technique that we need to use in Peru or in Mexico or in Argentina, but something that could use less water, so the competing uses cannot deal with some type of conflicts at some point between sectors or parts of society.
Okay, thank you. The next one would be, how is the Americas facing the sustainable infrastructure regarding the consumption of water and the concern of saving water? What countries are still on the way to operate with the sustainable infrastructure?
Okay, that's also a very interesting question. There are countries, let me say Costa Rica, Uruguay, I see that Chile is one that too. They're doing a lot of effort, especially in the nexus between energy and water, to improve the use of renewable waters. So their infrastructure is becoming very solid. But there are other countries which are not that innovative regarding uses of water for producing energy, so their infrastructure is kind of old and so on. I'm not going to mention countries in particular on that regard, but there are a lot, and especially in the energy sector. So their low investment in renewables associated to, let's say, hydropower, things like this, even though they have the potential and capacity to do so, are so limited that they give space to more fossil fuels type of energy production. So they are more pollutants, and they have to, every time that the oil prices rises, so they struggle with their economy, and especially if this is a poor country, it's becoming poorest, and the social problems start arising. Beside that, if you take another sector into consideration, for example, the potable water, the plants for producing potable water, I think that all countries are trying to catch up with the demand. But still, you see on the news, and you just take a look at 2 or 3 countries you could take on the news, even though they are trying to catch up, they are limited because the population is becoming more urban, dependent on water pipelines, and the demand is growing. So this is a mixed type of response. There are some countries which are facing this infrastructure challenge with some possibilities, but there are others that does not. And the main factor here, which needs to be taken into account, is that the debt that the countries can or are allowed to have regarding the international banks has a ceiling. And many of these countries has already reached this stop. So the possibilities to invest in new infrastructure, which are normally very expensive, and this is why most of the governments are the ones who are carrying the load of that, is very limited. So they have to go to another sources, which are not the traditional sources, with preferential loans. And so the debt grows a lot with all the implications in the economy that they have. So I say that for the Americas, even though we have plenty of water, we need to use it wisely. So what we are planning here with these 2 topics is to be creative in a sense that how come through my innovation and my innovative ideas could lower the load on my grid for water demand. So we could have still certain space without taking more debt that created more economic problems to my country. And I think that this question is key in the factor of understanding how the system works.
Oh, okay. Let's wait just a few seconds more so we can receive more questions. Yes, we have one. You mentioned the relation between water and the production of food. The question is, in the future, will food be a crucial factor to address in the Americas?
Yes, it is. for the world. Because the more people we are, the more food we demand. And the more food we demand, the more land without great amount of water availability. Remember that one of the things that I told you is the water distribution. Even though we have this 45% of water from the world in the Americas, remember that I told you also that this is not well distributed. So there are regions with a lot of water, and there are regions with scarce water. So in some places, we are going to expand our territories for food productivity to areas in which we need irrigation. So I think that food production is going to be a major determinant also for the Americas. So that is where the opportunity jumps into the young minds of you guys. So you could start thinking in how to work in new system for irrigations, for expanding toward lands in which normally are not expensive lands, in which we could have some type of crops that could be useful for cities and so on, or some techniques. Sometimes we could think in small projects, but remember that very small projects could lead us on to small changes. We could think in large productivities and in association of several ideas that could help us to catch up with this demand of more food for the future.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have one question. It says, what is the role of the Americas with other continents regarding the almost 50% of water in the world? What's going to happen with this clear difference in the future of water consumption? Is there any forecast or situation?
Yes, there is an interesting position that because we are as an organization of American states, we are in a space for dialogue among the countries on different issues, and the issue of development and water is one of them. And we believe that having the possibility that the next World Water Forum in 2018 is going to be in Brasilia, in Brazil, there is an opportunity for us as a continent to promote a rationale that could lead us to our water convention. It's like a water agreement on uses, and we are going to start promoting some of the common things that we understand and believe that could be useful. So, and we will invite the rest of the world to join us in some way. Remember that things like the human right to water came from Bolivia, a country from our region, from our hemisphere. Bolivia was the country that promoted in the World Water Forum of Istanbul some years ago the issue of water as a human right. Then it went through the UN, and now is a binding type of agreement among countries. Okay, so I think that the America has to invite the rest of the world on do better management. Integrated water resources management came from the Earth Summit from Brazil. So in some way, Americas has been always produced a lot of thoughts on water management, transboundary aquifers management. Again, the Americas. So I think that having almost half of the water of the world implies certain responsibility. And I think that some of the things that we have to approach with more determination is how to manage this water wisely so we could catch up with demand, understanding that the water is climate dependent and this climate is changing, so water is going to change.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Campos. We will wait just a few more seconds so we can know if there is another question. Well, I don't know if you, Mr. Campos, would like to add something before.
Well, I think that the honest thing to do here is that we have been not covering everything that we wish to cover because the time is limited, and also the possibility for people to be connected is limited. But they have my email, I hope, or you could pass it to them, which is mcampos@oas.org. So I would be more than pleased with my team to be at your service in any specifics. If you would like to share some ideas in which we could have awards, at least to tell you that's good it is, or some approach that we could note, or some contacts that we could make for you, that would be we will be more than happy. I think that the top topics being selected by the EcoReto this year are fundamental for the future of water management in the Americas, and and especially the issue of agriculture. And as I show you, the big challenges that we are facing, the limitations in investment, limitations in infrastructure, and so on. So we need to jump with some new ideas and solutions. I think that the young entrepreneurs are the ones who really could dictate the future on water management in the Americas.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Campos. I think we have no more questions for this webinar. So I think this is the end of the presentation. Thank you for having explained us this important topic, and thanks to the audience for sending the questions that can help young entrepreneurs to participate in the Eco Challenge category of TIC Americas. Thank you again, Mr. Campos, for joining us today, and thank you to the audience again.
Thanks to you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.